The best of money matters. The big story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. Singapore's ongoing trade talks with the United States come at a critical juncture for the global economy. Deputy Prime Minister Hongbin Jeong on May 16th reported progress on trade talks with the U.S. In fact, preferential or even zero tariffs on Singapore's pharmaceutical exports to the U.S. may be a possible concession. That said, it looks like Singapore might not be racing to upgrade its economic growth forecast later this week, as recent positive developments on the trade and tariffs fronts are insufficient to cut through the deep uncertainty clouding the outlook. So as the U.S. maintains a 10% baseline tariff and considers sector-specific levies, what exactly is Singapore aiming to achieve from these discussions? And what would constitute a meaningful win, not just in terms of tariffs, but in securing long-term trade resilience and technology access? And how should Singapore position itself amid unpredictable global trade dynamics? Well, joining us today to share more is MEI Yuan, who is the Assistant Professor of Economics at the Singapore Management University. Hi, Professor. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, it's a pleasure.
All right, Professor. Last week, Deputy Prime Minister Hongbin Jeong reported progress on trade talks with the U.S. What are Singapore's top priorities in these trade negotiations with the U.S., and what progress has Singapore made so far with these talks?
So I think the best outcome is, of course, everything going back to before the Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs. But I think that would be very difficult to achieve. So I think the top priority of Singapore for now is to make sure that the pharmaceutical sector and the semiconductor sector could have very low or even zero tariffs without too much concessions in other areas. And based on the news and the announcement from DPM Gang, it sounds like he was pretty optimistic about achieving this kind of goals. Yeah.
Right. I mean, DPM Gan also said while a 10% baseline tariff on Singapore remains, non-negotiable, there is hope that the Republic will be sparred from an upcoming sectoral levy on its pharmaceutical exports. So, Professor, how important is it for Singapore to secure exclusions for high-value sectors like pharmaceuticals and semiconductors? I mean, what are the potential economic implications for Singapore if the U.S. does indeed impose sectoral tariffs on such sectors?
So I think the U.S. market is important, but not the most important market. So if we think about semiconductors, the U.S. is the fourth largest export destination behind mainland China, Hong Kong, and Malaysia. So high tariffs on Singaporean products to the U.S. would, of course, affect the local firms, but the actual impact would also depend on how much U.S. impose tariffs on other exporting countries. So overall, I think it's important, but not crucially important.
Well, then, given the progress of U.S.'s talks with other countries on trade, how likely are we to secure preferential or even zero tariffs on Singapore's pharmaceutical exports to the U.S.?
This is a difficult question, and we don't have much information, probably because the negotiation is still ongoing, but based on the announcement from DPM Gang, it sounds like it's pretty likely, I would guess.
Okay. Well, there are also early signs that Washington is open to talks on maintaining a stable two-way flow of semiconductors and related technologies with Singapore. So, Professor, how significant is this for Singapore's tech and manufacturing sectors, and what might Singapore be hoping to secure from such discussions?
So I think the negotiation about semiconductors is more tricky. It's trickier than pharmaceuticals, and probably the U.S. would want to impose a higher level of tariffs. So, of course, the goal for the Singaporean side is still to achieve zero tariffs. But if that's not possible, we probably should aim for low but certain tariffs, meaning that there's no uncertainty about future trade policy from the U.S. side.
Right. Well, then overall, in your view, what would a successful outcome from the U.S.-Singapore talks look like? I mean, what tangible results would count as a so-called big win?
Big win would be zero tariffs and, just no, trade agreements. confirm no tariff for the foreseeable future. But if that's too difficult to achieve, then a low level of tariff, meaning some tariffs, but no uncertainty in the trade policy of semiconductors, would still be considered a big win, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, now DPM Gan has, though, warned that any deal on sectoral tariffs is unlikely to happen anytime soon. I mean, that's as there is much uncertainty over the durability of the U.S.-China deal as well. So, Professor, how much faith, should we place in the 90-day truce between the U.S. and China, and what are the risks if talks break down again?
So again, this is a difficult question. It could go better or it could go worse. But in my opinion, this 90-day truce between the U.S. and China has shown that the U.S. was reluctant to impose very high level, more than 100% tariff on Chinese goods. So I think the chance of U.S. and China going back to what we had 30 days ago is unlikely.
Well, is Singapore at risk of being caught in the middle of U.S.-China trade tensions, and how can it maintain its neutrality while defending its trade interests then?
I think the Singaporean government has done a good job in keeping the balance between the two superpowers, the U.S. and China. And for the trade negotiation with the U.S., we haven't observed any countries have yielded to the request from the U.S. to basically cut ties with China. So as long as Singapore is not the first one, I don't think there's much to worry.
All right. Well, in that aspect then, to what extent do broader U.S. foreign policy goals, such as countering China's, tech rise, influence how it negotiates with Singapore?
I don't think it would matter that much. In fact, it's the relationship between the U.S. and China that would affect the performance of Singapore a lot. For example, the ongoing discussion about TikTok between the U.S. and China, if that negotiation goes very bad, maybe TikTok would need to cut off from the U.S. market, and that would definitely affect Singapore.
Right. Okay. Well, then taking a look at the current economic outlook for Singapore, most analysts believe Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry will maintain its 0 to 2% gross domestic product growth forecast for 2025 when it releases the first quarter economic survey on May 22nd. So, Professor, do you align with this outlook? Will the MTI, upgrade its forecast anytime soon?
Well, making an accurate forecast is always a very difficult task. But in this case, I actually agree with the numbers from the MTI. 0 to 2% is a reasonable range. And maybe there will be big agreements between the U.S., China, or between other its trading partners, or it could go bad. But for now, I think this is a reasonable range.
Okay. Well, on that note, should Singapore consider revising its economic policy toolkit to, cushion potential shocks from the U.S. tariffs? I mean, if so, what kinds of measures could be effective?
In the past month or 45 days, a lot of things happened. There are major policy changes going back and forth. So now I think it's too early to tell what should Singapore do, other than just be prepared, be fast in terms of adjusting policies.
Okay. Then how will ongoing trade uncertainty affect domestic business confidence, hiring decisions and investment here in Singapore?
Trade policy uncertainty is a big negative shock to Singapore. Thinking about multinationals who are serving the U.S. market, if they want to set up a factory in Singapore or other neighboring countries, what should they do now? Postponing the decision or the investment, or changing to another location. So it's actually very bad, and especially for the investments in Singapore.
Moving forward then, Professor, what steps should Singapore, take next to sustain momentum in trade talks with the U.S.?
I think currently Singapore is doing a fine job, just keeping calm, be neutral, act fast. But, more concrete steps is too early to tell.
Okay. Should Singapore consider bilateral trade-offs or incentives such as, investment guarantees or tech cooperation to kind of gain tariff relief?
So actually, based on the negotiation between the U.S. and China, it appears that giving concessions wouldn't work as well as having alternatives or, just head-on bargain with the U.S., right? That's what China has been doing. And based on the 90-day truce, it seems that China's strategy has been successful. So I don't think giving unilateral concessions to the U.S. is the best strategy.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for your time and your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was MEI Yuan, who is the Assistant Professor of Economics at Singapore Management University. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.